Hi everybody. This time what I want to do is talk about the Massachusetts Curriculum Framework. And so I'm going to talk fast because there's a lot to cover in this and in the 15 minutes I'm allotted on screencast. So, to get going, the Massachusetts Curriculum Framework are the standards that you will use as teachers in the state of Massachusetts. So you sign a contract with your school system, and one of the parts of that contract will say that you agree to teach these standards and adhere to the curriculum that is used by your school system. So this presentation is both a combination of some of my own materials as well as quite a bit of help from the Department of Education, from DESE, because they put out these standards and they're the ones that assure that these are the standards that we are using as teachers. So, first of all, DESE says we believe every student needs to use grade appropriate materials every single day. So the idea is that students will be using texts that are right for them, the individual student, and this is a huge change because it really specifically says every day you're working with appropriate materials, and that these materials both include written text that you're reading every day, but you're also using science every week. You're dealing with data every week, even as young as grades pre-K, and that you are addressing real-world problems, meaningful real-world problems in your content across the content areas every day. When I'm talking about content areas, I'm talking about reading, math, science, and social studies, along with and embedded within these are the concepts, and we're going to talk about this in a few minutes, of digital literacy and computer science. So the first piece of this and a core focus in the Massachusetts frameworks is mathematics. And the idea is that mathematics has this balanced approach where at the core of it, or the center of it, is rigor. And rigor is this idea that materials are challenging, that they bring students to a higher level of thinking, that they require them to have an understanding of their own learning preferences and and being able to get answers and find answers on their own. So mathematical rigor is extremely important. Rigor in general is considered extremely important. We use within the math framework mathematical concepts where students are able to make sense of these and understand them, that they can do procedures fluently. They know how to do addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, and then the higher concepts using fractions and using geometry and all of those areas of mathematics, and then also being able to solve problems and to be able to solve real world problems. The Massachusetts mathematical standards are to be taught and assessed. Assessment is a huge part of the framework, and we must agree as teachers to assess these both informative ways all along throughout the course of the year, and then in summative ways through standardized testing, which we had a conversation about under our Common Core, the video you saw on Common Core. So students in the standards must understand what math learners do, how they solve problems, how it is applicable across content areas. These mathematical standards must be connected to students' own belief in themselves. So the idea is that everybody can learn math, and you are able to do this, and that it can apply to a spectrum of learners. So students with the most challenges, students with the highest abilities, students that have a variety of learning needs. So the standards are broken up into 4 separate areas, and the idea is these 4 areas are the overarching habits of mind, reasoning and explaining. So With overarching habits in mind, I'll just go back to that. We're talking about the idea is that you can persevere, that this is that growth mindset stuff. This is the stuff, and so I would suggest that if you don't know what growth mindset it is, do a little quick Google search about it. It's the idea that students believe they are able to do things, that it's okay to make mistakes, it's part of the learning process, and that's built into these mathematical practices. Students can reason, solve problems, and explain what their process is, that they can use tools in mathematics and model and explain. So they can use manipulatives, they can use blocks, they can use computers to do this all the way through. Remember, we're talking about grades pre-K all the way to 12, and that they can see structure and generalize. So they can apply their reasoning to other areas as well. Now, the other part of this is that every grade level has multiple standards. So you can tell a standard, the grade level, by the very first number. So this is grade 2. And the idea is that any standard has conceptual understanding, so you understand what is going on in this standard. So like if I'm counting by twos, what does that mean? What's the procedural skill? How do I do it? And what's my capacity? So every student needs to be able, this is what makes the mathematical rigor in each of these, in each standard. And so that they understand what odd and even is, and that these are a foundation for multiplication. And you see multiplication being taught at grade 2. Grade 6, it's the same, even though the standard is different and much more complex, talking about greatest common factors and common multiples, but the idea that there is conceptual understanding, what is a common factor, what is the distributive property, what are the skills that need to be done so I understand how to determine what a greatest common factor is, and I can apply those understanding of multiples and factors to look at numbers in a more complex way. Now, the next set of standards that goes along with math quite closely are the science, technology, and engineering standards. And the idea here is that there is rigor and balance, and that they are brought together, and they form a partnership, really, and there is a real commitment on the part of DESE, of the state, to have students career and college ready, especially in the STEM fields. You're probably thinking that sounds just like that Common Core language, and it is. It's taken directly from that. And the idea is that you will have students use their mathematical rigor and apply it and use it to learn the science, technology, and engineering standards. In addition to this, there is another set of standards that go along with the Massachusetts framework in general. These are the digital literacy and computer science standards. These are quite broad, and they go from grades K, not pre-K, but K, all the way to grade 12. And these are the major strands for them. They are not all, there are many, many standards that go by the grade span. So this is a little bit different than the math, and you'll see in the reading as well, the ELA, is that these are not specifically for a grade, because the idea is that you might have a span of both ability with your students, which is true, and also opportunity to incorporate these standards might be different at different grade levels. So they talk about things like digital literacy and digital citizenship. They talk about using digital tools, so being able to do research, collaborate on the web. They specifically talk about like what is a computer and what is it doing, so that you understand the device itself. And then finally, there's this idea around computational thinking, which of course relates directly to math, but also the idea that your computer system and how it works is modeled, the model for it is the way the human brain works. And also within computational thinking is the idea of coding. Coding starts all the way down in grade K. So it's pretty interesting that this is part of our elementary standards in the framework that we teach from. And you're responsible to understand these and embed these within your lessons. And you'll learn that over the course of your program. Teachers do a lot. So the next piece of this, and the other side of the coin, completely equal to math, science, technology, is the ELA, or literacy standards. And these standards have the understanding that you are not just focusing on reading, just like in the Common Core, but you're focusing on writing as well. You're also focusing on reading as it has to do with the different content areas, as well as understanding how to write about and talk about data. So you're also, and you'll see some of those terms and some of those phrases that you heard from the Common Core are used here in the ELA standards. And the idea is that students not only know how to write well, but they know how to express themselves well. ELA and literacy is, there are pre-K to 5 standards along with and these standards tend to talk about reading more explicitly and how to learn to read and write rather than the grade 6 and above standards. You are responsible, and those of you getting elementary certification, for the standards from grade pre-K to grade 8. And I think I told you this before in the Common Core, that little Common Core video. One of the things that's really interesting, though, in the pre-K to 5 standards is that they not only learn reading in terms of fluency and comprehension, they also learn how to read symbols, like for example north, south, east, and west on a map, or greater than and less than. So there is a definite link to the mathematical standards as well. And that's really explicit here in this grade 2 because they talk about understanding about how to express opinion. At grade 2, this is a writing standard, and being able to both read an opinion piece and also be able to write a persuasive piece as well based on the opinion piece that's been read, and that this can be done has a link to mathematics and being able to explain your thinking. So these standards are purposefully linked together. And the next part of this are the history and social studies curriculum framework. They were adopted in 2018, and they have been around since about 2015. They're based on the national framework from the National Society for Social Studies Education, but they also are specifically geared toward, they have a Massachusetts component that's quite strong. So in grades, so you can see the progression here. It has a scope and sequence. Grades 1 is really about civics, like what's my community, what does that mean? Grade 2 is world geography. So what are the continents, what are oceans, where are they? Being able to look at a globe, being able to look at a map. Grade 3 is all about Massachusetts history, and a lot of that is really in flux. Based on some of the changes to the the writing about early colonial periods. Grade 4 is physical geography, so all this, the different regions of North America and early history of the United States by those regions. Grade 5 starts to talk about U.S. history and the Civil War all the way up to the modern civil rights movement. That is difficult to do and tends to be done in like smaller chunks and units. And then grade 6 and 7 is a 2-year sequence of world geography, including ancient and civilizations like ancient Greece and ancient Rome. So, and then in grade 8 it goes back to civics, but and you can you as someone who is certified in grades 1 through 6 are responsible for knowing this, that these are the topic areas all the way up to grade 8. So, for example, here's a grade 3 standard that is used in social studies, and it is key ideas and details. So you ask and answer questions to demonstrate the understanding of a text and refer back to the text. It's very, very much like the ELA standards, and so they are linked very closely together. They are not separate. So you would see when you look at the framework, the social studies framework, even though there's a scope and sequence, the standards link right to the ELA standards. And there's actually, as you go up in the grades, there's strong links to the math standards as